I used to marry young men for one night and take money to feed my children. One night, a 55-year-old man came to me and asked me to pay him $50,000 for 2 nights. I agreed, but the old man made me do it on the first night because he had the strength of 10 boys. Repentance. Repentance. Kashif, you can't do this to me. You owe it to God to have these 2 children. I am your wife. You told me that you would keep me happy for the rest of my life. Why are you making me suffer? But Kashif had changed his eyes. My words were not affecting him at all. I was crying in front of him, sobbing, folding my hands. I couldn't help but hold his feet. But he was sitting with his new bride and looking at me with smiling eyes. His new bride's guards were breaking the belongings of my house. I was trying to stop everyone by holding them, but no one was stopping. Exhausted, I sat at the feet of this new bride and folded my hands in front of her and said, "For God's sake, you listen to me. I will live my life as your slave forever. I will not say, 'Oh no,' but don't do such cruelty. Where will I go with my 2 innocent children? My father has also closed his door on me. Listened to my cry, but no one listened to me. After throwing out the belongings of my house, Kashif stood up from his place, held my arm, made me stand at the feet of his bride, and looked me in the eyes and said brutally, 'I, Kashif Ibrahim, divorce my wife Naima Baig with all my senses.' He repeated this word twice more and threw me and my 2 innocent children outside. I was helplessly watching my destruction on the ground. I turned around and saw him sitting in a car with his new wife and leaving before my eyes. His wife's guards had locked my house. I cried a lot and shouted and cursed Kashif, but now I have no place to go. After a while, the woman living opposite us came to me and, while rubbing her head, said, 'You stay at my house tonight. Find a new place for yourself in the morning.' She was a very compassionate woman. I immediately kissed her hand and, wrapping my children around her, walked to her house. Tears were still flowing from my eyes. They had given me the room of their daughter and daughter-in-law. Their son and daughter-in-law had gone to bed for a day. I laid my children on the bed and half lay down next to them. I couldn't believe it. I was ruined. I no longer have a roof over my head. My head has gone far away from me. I loved Kashif very much. My life was ready for him, but what he had done to me was not enough for me. I wanted to strangle Kashif, but it was not possible. He had become a pharaoh. He was not aware of anyone. He did not realize that I was his beloved wife, whom he had claimed to love, and that these 2 children were his own blood, part of his body. But he had thrown the 3 of us out. I had been crying for a long time, and then fell asleep exhausted. I knew that there was no use in crying now. I had to be brave now. If I didn't dare, I would be miserable for the rest of my life. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. My eyes opened at the first ray of sunlight. She was standing at the door, looking at the 3 of us very sadly. She was a very nice woman. I stood up from my seat and leaned against her chest while she patted my back and spoke. "Be brave. There is a big battle ahead. I could only support you so much. If it were up to me, I would have kept you in my house for the rest of my life. But I also have a son and a daughter-in-law. They will not forgive me. Right now, they do not know that I have given you their room. When they find out, there will be another outcry." I understood their compulsion. I kissed their hands and said, "No, Mother. You have given me as much support as you had to. You also have your own compulsions. I will leave here in a little while with my children." She nodded in agreement and left. She had given me a place for one night. This was a great gain. Now I had to find my own house, otherwise there could have been a lot of problems. I had some money. Kashif often gave me money for household expenses, from which I had added a little. I had a few thousand, with which I could get a small house on rent. The rest, I will take the name of Allah and get a job. I had made a plan right away. After a while, I came to my mother wearing a dupatta and looking at her said, "Mother, I will come in a little while. My 2 children are in your care. I will come in an hour at the most." My mother shook her head, and I quietly came out of the house. She was a very patient and simple woman who used to say on her face that it was not like other houses in our neighborhood. They had a lot to show, but no heart to give. I had come to an estate agency. When I reached there and told them about my compulsion, they were silent for a while, and one of them shook his head in denial and said that you cannot get any house like this because you do not have a job. Nor is there any permanent employment through which you can pay the rent. First, you should find a job, then we will find you a house to rent. While I immediately folded my hands in front of these people and said, "Brother, don't be so cruel to me. My children are very young. I have brought them to my neighbor's house. I have no place to stay. Please show me some mercy." Suddenly, a man stood up from his place and started to pull down the shutter of the estate agency shop. I was immediately worried, and looking at all of them, I asked in a questioning tone, "What are you guys doing?" I was very shocked. Looking at me, he said brutally, "If you fulfill the desire of the four of us now and quench our thirst, we will give you a house in which you can live comfortably. You will not have much problem with rent, nor will you have to study in other problems. The rent will also be reasonable, and life will also be comfortable. But now we all have to fulfill our demands." As soon as he said this, he started coming towards me, while I shook my head in the negative and came to the shutter of the shop and started banging the shutter like crazy. All three of them were scared and said while holding my hands, "Beware, even if a sound comes out of your throat, if someone from outside comes, I will accuse you and defame you." But I held my honor very dear. Yes, I was ready to do anything, but I could not stoop to that level at any cost. I was a respectable woman and a Muslim. I knew that adultery is absolutely unforgivable. God Almighty will burn adulterers in the fire of hell. I started banging the shutter like a madman. At that moment, some people from the neighborhood came and the shutter was opened. They were forcing me, while I immediately hid behind the people who came and started telling them about their activities. The people were moving forward to kill these four. Many people had complained about them that they were not good people. They had opened the estate and sat down, but they were not worthy of it at all. I left there crying and came to my children. I entered the street and saw my two children sitting near the goods in the street. I was surprised. I went to my son Ali and, while loving him, said in a questioning tone, "I left you both inside and came back. Then what are you two doing outside?" He had said very innocently that his mother's daughter-in-law had thrown him out and said not to show her face again. I had closed my eyes with restraint. I knew that all this was bound to happen. I had said while caressing my son's face, "No problem. Now we are leaving here, so don't worry. Come on, pick up your belongings and hold your sister's hand. We are leaving." I had glanced at my house. Salt water had started to gather in my eyes once again. What a trial this was. Everything was beyond my understanding. Man is the enemy of man. Today, I understood this. I took a deep breath and surrendered myself to Allah. I left this neighborhood and headed towards my mother's house. I had run away and got married. I was afraid that my mother would accept it or not. I had just reached the corner of the street when a woman suddenly came to me and, holding my hand, said, "Are you divorced?" I looked at her in surprise and nodded in the affirmative. She immediately said, "If you support me, I will give you a house, money, and food." I was surprised. There were bruises on my forehead. Looking at this woman, I asked in a questioning tone, "Who are you and what do you admire?" She said, looking at me, "I was there when those four men did that to you. You can trust me. If I support you, you will benefit and your life will be easier." I was in a strange dilemma. I had 2 children. I was a beautiful young woman. If this woman was wrong, my life could have been ruined. But right now, I had no choice but to listen to this woman. I could not go to my mother's house. I had to face a different kind of humiliation there. Thinking about something, I looked at this woman and said simply, "You have to do it for the sake of Allah. If you do anything wrong to me, the Lord of the worlds will not forgive you at any cost." After listening to me, she nodded and instructed me to follow her. My body was trembling. I was praying to Kashif in my heart that he had not done good to me. If he had not done this to me, I would not have had to endure all this today. But God willing, when I came to the road, that woman was standing next to a car. I was immersed in a sea of surprise. The woman seemed quite poor, but she had a car. I was surprised. My younger daughter and son were also a little worried. This woman had opened the back door for the three of us and sat in the front seat and started driving the car. I was surprised once again. She looked at me and said, "Your name is very good. I can give you a job, but it will be a little difficult, but the work will be halal." I thanked her and looked at this woman and said softly, "May Allah bless you a lot. I will always be grateful to you if you do this for me." Yes, after hearing me, she smiled, and while turning the car said, "I have been doing this job for many years, and now I have a lot of experience in this job. How old are you?" After hearing her, I was shocked for a moment. She was asking me in between. That's why I was a little nervous, but immediately I controlled myself, and while looking at this woman, she said, "I am 24 years old." She gave a slight nod and turned the car in a slum area. She parked the car on the road and ordered me to get out. I got out of the car with my children. She instructed me to follow her and walked through small streets, not knowing where she was going. I did not understand anything. After leaving 2 streets, she entered the 3rd street and stopped in front of the house on the corner. Her speed was much faster than mine. I reached her after a while and she looked at me and said, "From today you will live in this house. For now, you go inside. I will bring you food. Then we will sit comfortably and talk about this job." I was surprised at what was happening. Everything was beyond my understanding. That woman had come and gone like a volcano. I had entered the house with my children. The house was small, with a small courtyard and 2 rooms. I sat quietly on the bed and waited for the woman to come. My son looked at me and said in a questioning tone, "Mom, will we live here from today?" I gave a slight nod and held her to my chest. My heart was very sad. Today, I had stumbled a lot and sat down. My heart was praying a lot for this woman. She had supported me when I had no one. After a while, that woman had entered the house with food. She had set the table and fed us all. After eating, she signaled the 2 children to go inside the room. There was furniture, bed, everything in this house. That's why I wasn't worried about anything. My 2 children had gone inside and started playing. She had sat on the bed next to me and said, placing her hand on my shoulder, "I can understand your pain very well. I know very well what is going on in your heart at this moment. I never help anyone so much, but for some reason, seeing your helpless appearance, I felt sorry for you. The way you were folding your hands in front of these beasts, I had seen everything. That's why I had decided to take care of you. I will help in any way." Saying this, she fell silent, while my sharp eyes were focused on her existence. She fell silent for a while, and then after hearing what she said, I was immersed in a sea of surprise. I shook my head in denial and said, "No, you are joking. There is no such job, right?" She shook her head in the negative and while looking at me said, "This is not a forbidden thing. This way you can feed your children and also protect yourself from these beasts. Neither will Allah be angry nor will your livelihood stop." While I shook my head in the negative, and while looking at her I said, "Yes, it is true that Allah will not be angry, but I will not be able to satisfy my conscience. After a few days my son will grow up. So how will I answer him? What was his mother doing? I will become infamous like this. I cannot do this." Tears were flowing from my eyes. What this woman had said had taken the earth from under my feet. She placed her hand on my shoulder and spoke seriously. "There is no use in crying like this or getting emotional. Now, you have to accept all this because your life is extremely painful. You have to compromise on everything." I knew she was saying absolutely right. But how could I do this? He said, "You will marry every man for 1 night. He will give you money, spend the night with you, and then in the morning, he will divorce you and leave. Then the next day, he will marry you. You will marry again and spend the night with another man. In the morning, he will give you money and leave. It was true that I did not want to commit adultery, and it was not adultery, but still, how could I do it? I was not able to convince myself for this. This woman placed her hand on my shoulder and, holding out a mobile phone and a number towards me, said, "I am giving you this mobile phone too, and this number is mine. When you decide, call me on this number. I often have boys and men who need to fulfill their needs, but they also do not want to commit adultery like you. You should marry them and spend the night with them. It will be your job and theirs too." Saying this, she stood up and placed her hand on my head and said, "Don't worry. Allah is very kind. You are only taking this step to feed your children. That's why be brave. You are the one who has taken care of everything from now on. If you break down, cry, and wash your face, what will happen to your children? There is no shadow of a man on your head. You have to drive your own car ahead." She was speaking exactly right. Everything she said was true. Tears were flowing from my eyes, and I was praying to Kashif in my heart that if Kashif had not done this to me, I would not have been standing at this crossroads today. Today, I would not have had to take this step to feed myself. But Kashif had become a pharaoh. He had no mercy. He had destroyed my entire life. For this, I betrayed my parents. I had crossed this threshold, destroying the honor my father had built over so many years. The threshold that my father had taught me to climb, and the person for whom I had done all this in the end, he had also betrayed me. Even after becoming the father of 2 children, he had left his beloved wife in greed for money and had thrown away parts of his body. Are there such people in the world? I couldn't even imagine. That woman was gone, and I was staring at some invisible point on the ground. That day had passed in a strange struggle. I couldn't sleep all night. I kept thinking about it. For a moment, it occurred to me that I should call this woman and say yes, but the next moment my conscience would reproach me and say, "No, don't do that. When your son Ali grows up, what will you answer him? When your daughter gets married, what will I tell her in-laws about what you do? How have you taken care of your children?" But I knew that when morning comes, I will have nothing to eat. How will I take care of my children? I only had a few thousand, which I knew would be gone in a few days. After that, I will have to get a job. I will need money. I had to take care of my children. I had a very big life. At midnight, I sat down, exhausted. I was no longer able to make any decisions. I looked around and saw my 2 innocent flowers. I dialed the number. While leaving, the woman told me that you can call me any time. I will be awake. That's why I thought this time was right. On the first ring, this woman picked up my phone and her chirping voice came out of the speaker. "I knew you wouldn't do such a big loss at any cost. You don't know. Now you will be successful very soon. I will send a client for you tomorrow. If you make him happy on the first day, he will also get his friends to contact you. That's why don't you show any delicacy or be shy." I had just said yes and hung up the phone. Time was passing by. I opened my eyes at the first rays of morning. My 2 children were awake and playing in the veranda. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door of our house. I understood that this woman had sent a client. I took a deep breath and went to the door. When I opened the door, I saw a young boy standing there. He greeted me slowly and entered. Behind him were a Maulana Sahib and 4 witnesses. I was looking at everyone very carefully. Among all of them, I was married to him. I did not think it was appropriate to talk to him much. I wanted to do everything quickly so that he would give me money and divorce me and leave. He had married me in a complete manner and then sent away the Maulana Sahib and the witnesses. I was sitting quietly by his side. My children were also standing next to me, looking at this man with strange eyes. He looked at me and said, "I will come at night. For now, there is one thing to do. I have already married him. The most important thing is that we meet at night." He did not stay after saying this, but had already left. When I saw my innocent children, they seemed quite scared because they did not understand anything about what had happened to their mother a short while ago. I had hugged both my children to my chest and cried profusely. I looked at the sky with wet eyes and said, "Allah, what is all this? Please save me from all these things. I do not want to do this. My heart is not willing to accept this. My holy Lord, grant me the ability to live a life of honor. Have mercy on me." I had been talking to my Allah for a long time. Time was passing and my heart was beating faster. As the evening shadows fell, my heart had stopped. I knew that the young man was coming. I had prepared the other room. I had also quickly fed and put my children to bed. Exactly as I had thought, he had come home at 9 o'clock at night. I greeted him when I saw him and asked him for water, etc. While he held my hand and took me to the other room, I was sitting in front of him with my eyes lowered. Suddenly he held my hand and put it to his lips. A current ran through my body. Till today, I had not given my body to anyone except Kashif, nor had I ever gone near anyone. I was a very respectable woman. I always went out in a veil and returned home from outside in a veil. Today was the first time I was doing such a thing in Kashif's absence. Yes, this young man was my husband, but still my heart was not willing to do this. He came close and kissed my forehead and slowly pushed his limits. It was beginning to encroach. I thought that he would talk to me, tell me something, tell me his story. But he didn't say anything. He was just doing his job silently. I closed my eyes and just waited for time to pass. The night was melting away drop by drop, but that young man was not leaving me at any cost. At the time of the Fajr call to prayer, he left me. His condition had deteriorated considerably, while every part of my body was also breaking down in pain. I was on the verge of death from the pain. I took one look at him and shook my head in denial and went to the washroom. I had cleaned myself and sat outside in the veranda. I knew that after a while he would wake up and come and give me money, then divorce me and leave this house forever. I suddenly felt like a prostitute who spends one night with a man and the next morning that man gives her money. Tears were flowing from my eyes. I once again looked at the sky with moist eyes and said in anguish, "Oh Allah, why is this happening to me? I have always obeyed you. I have never disobeyed your orders. I have lived with honor. So why is all this happening to me today?" But neither I had an answer for this reason, nor did my Allah give me any answer. Time was passing, and he woke up after a while. At around 12 o'clock, he came out of the room. My 2 children were playing in the veranda. He took a look at the existence of my innocent children, and then took out 10,000 rupees from his pocket and placed it on my palm. He was standing in front of my eyes and left after saying divorce 3 times. I had a hard time controlling myself. Suddenly, I felt like someone had taken my soul from my body. When I was getting married to this person, I had a hard time accepting it, and now, after getting divorced once again, I felt like I was losing myself. Why was I feeling so much pain? I couldn't understand, even though I knew that this marriage was temporary, but then I shook my head. I had to be strong. It was just the beginning. There were still many marriages to be had and many divorces to be had. What was the sadness now? I quietly went to the kitchen and started cooking lunch for my children. I had a hard time controlling myself and was acting as if nothing had happened. My son Ali came to me after a while, and looking at me, he said in a questioning tone, "Mom, can I ask you something?" I shook my head slightly. He looked at me and said, "Mom, who was this uncle? He came yesterday too, and just like Baba, he divorced you and left. Was he also our Baba?" I looked at my younger son in surprise and thought that he did not understand these things. But today, after hearing him, my 14 senses were enlightened. I immediately sat next to him and shook my head in denial and said, "No, he was not your Baba. Your Baba is just Kashif. He was my friend. He came to meet me. He came to ask why you people are living here. Now don't ask such questions again, and if anyone comes, don't come out of the room and always keep the little one with you." My son immediately shook his head in astonishment and ran to his sister. I felt like crying again. What a trial this was, but I kept myself strong. All this was going to happen. In a few days, Ali would come to know about my every move. That was what I was afraid of. He was not a foolish child, but a very smart and sensible child. Time had started to pass slowly. About 2 days later, this woman had sent another man for me. I had now got the marriage done in the room and had taken my children to that other room. After the marriage was done, it had started right away by sending the cleric and witnesses. He had also not spoken to me. He had spent time with me during the day and had divorced me in the darkness of the night. I was once again left incomplete. I had no one to support me. Now this happened every 2 days. A man would come and get me married, spend the night, give me money, and then divorce me the next morning. I had been doing this for about 6 months, and during these 6 months, I had experienced all kinds of things. I forgot the pain and considered this work as my job. Getting married and getting divorced had nothing to do with it now. I just had to please people so that they could give me huge amounts of money and I could fulfill every wish of my children. I had to send my children to school, spend money on their education, feed them, and give them every comfort of life. That's why I was now working with courage. I was doing this work with all my heart. It was 10 o'clock at night. I had gone to bed. It had been 2 days today, but no one had come for the wedding. I was a little worried. What happened that this woman had not sent anyone? I was about to call today when suddenly there was a knock on the door of the house. I was immersed in a sea of wonder. Who could have come home at that time because all the men who came in the afternoon or in the evening? This area was such that no one asked anyone any questions. Everyone was only concerned with themselves. That's why the locals hadn't bothered me yet as to why men kept coming to your house every day. I was just wondering whether I should open the door or not, when suddenly there was a knock on the door again from the children. Fearing that my sleep would be disturbed, I immediately stood up and, reaching the door, said in a questioning tone, "Who is it?" Suddenly a loud voice came. "Open the door. I am a client. Shargina has sent me." Shargina was the name of this woman. I took a deep breath. I felt very bad. I wanted to tell Shargina not to send anyone at that time. When I opened the door, a 55-year-old man was standing there. I looked behind him, but he was alone. He had entered the house and closed the door. I stood to one side, watching his every move. He looked at me and said, "What are you looking at here, girl? I am your client. You will get married to me. Why do you have any objection?" I shook my head in the negative and instructed him to sit on the bed. He shook his head in the negative and said, "I have come here to make a deal with you, but I will marry you in the morning and take you with me." I immediately said, "No, absolutely not. I will not go with anyone. This is my room. This is where I spend my time. Whatever you want to do, you can do in this room." I had spoken frankly. In the beginning, I did not know how to communicate at all. Only Shargina used to talk about me, but now I had become an expert in this work. That is why I used to talk to everyone. After listening to me, he shook his head in the negative and said, "No, not at all. I will take you with me. If you do not like it, then I will leave. By the way, my intention was to give you more money. I will keep you with me for 2 days and 2 nights, and for that, I will give you 50,000 rupees. I was shocked. No one had given me such a large amount till now. Whoever came would give 10,000 or 5,000 and leave. No one had more time than that. I immediately said, "I have 2 small children. I will take them with me, if you do not mind." He immediately said, "No, I don't mind. If I can take their mother, I will take these 2 children with me." I immediately smiled and promised that we would do it, but I didn't know what this man planned to do to me, how he was going to change my life. Time slowly passed and I had both my children ready by morning. The marriage took place at our house. and we got into the old man's car. He was a very rich man. I was amazed. He brought me straight to his mansion. I was stunned to see his house. He put his hand on my shoulder and, handing the children over to my aunt, took me to his room. As soon as I entered the room, he had me pinned to the bed. I was surprised to see this old man. I thought it would take very little time, but I had no idea how lively a person he was. He looked 55 years old, but he had more strength than a young boy. He had taken off his clothes and lay down on the bed with me. Time was passing slowly, but he was not moving away from me. Many times I had folded my hands in front of him, saying, "For God's sake, stop it. I am in pain." But he was not listening to me. He had done the limit while I was completely exhausted. The first night alone, he had made my condition so bad that I had decided that I would fold my hands in front of him and take 25,000. I will not take 50,000 because I could not spend another night with such a person. I had to live my life ahead. The next morning when he woke up, I saw him and said clearly that you should give me 25,000. I will not spend another night with you. When suddenly he changed his mind, he looked at me and said clearly that I cannot leave you now. I have liked you. I have tried to spend the night by marrying many girls like you, but you are the only one who has tolerated me, and now you will become my wife and stay with me for the rest of my life. You are handsome, beautiful, you have 2 children. See how long you will live like this. I will give you a roof, a luxurious car. I will give you a great life, but you will have to tolerate me in bed. Do you have any objection?" I was silent after hearing him. He was speaking absolutely right. It is the duty of a wife to take care of every need of her husband. If he could give me a better life and could be a father to my children, then I could accept all this. It had never crossed my mind that if this man dies, all this property will become mine. I held his hand with a sincere heart, and looking at him, I said, "I trust you. Don't leave me alone in the middle of the road. I have trusted anyone till now. It was Kashif, the father of my children, and now I am trusting you. So you won't betray me, right?" I had spoken to him once again while he had placed his hand on my cheek and promised that he would be faithful to him. There was no one before him and no one behind him. He was the only heir to all his property. He had spent that night with women somewhere, but he was satisfied with me. I had started a new life with my children. Sharjina had tried to contact me again, but I thanked her and blocked her number forever and started a new life with my husband, Shaukat. I am now living a satisfied life with my husband. Yes, he makes me feel bad, but he has become a father and placed his hand on the head of my children and has also given me a respectable life. He has never taunted me about my past, and this is the best thing about him, due to which I am very happy and satisfied. Perhaps I have got the fruit of my patience, and surely, as I expect from Allah, the same fruit will be given.